Deep in the humid lowlands of southern Mexico, where the jungle presses close and the rivers run slow and brown toward the Gulf, there are faces, enormous faces, carved from solid stone, some of them taller than a person, weighing many tons. They lie half-buried in the green, staring out across the centuries with an expression that is impossible to forget. Broad features, full lips, wide, watchful eyes. And on the head, something like a close-fitting helmet, as if for war, or for a game, or for a ritual we will never fully understand. These are the colossal heads, and when you stand before one, the first thing you feel is that it is looking at you, not past you, at you. A human face, individual, particular, carved with such care that it seems less like a monument than a portrait. The likeness of a specific person who lived and ruled and died an unimaginably long time ago. Each head is different. Each has its own features, its own expression, its own character. They are not gods, or not only gods. They are, it seems, people. Rulers, perhaps, immortalized in stone by a civilization that wanted them remembered. But here is what stops the mind. These faces were carved before the Maya, before the Aztec, before almost every civilization of the ancient Americas that you have ever heard of. The people who carved them were there first. They were the beginning. And by the time the famous civilizations of Mesoamerica rose to their glory, the people who carved these heads were already ancient history, already a mystery, already gone. We call them the Olmec, but that is not what they called themselves because we do not know what they called themselves. Their language is lost. Their writing, the oldest in all of the Americas, we cannot read. Their cities, raised from the swampland by the labor of thousands, were abandoned and swallowed by the jungle. They appeared, as far as we can see, with startling suddenness, a complex and sophisticated civilization seeming to rise fully formed from the lowland forest. They created wonders, the colossal heads, great earthen monuments, exquisite art, the first writing and perhaps the first calendar of the Americas. And then, after centuries of greatness, they faded, their great centers falling silent one by one, until they passed out of history entirely, leaving behind only the stone faces staring out of the green. And those faces have started arguments, because when people first looked at them in modern times, some saw features that did not match their expectations, and a controversy was born, a controversy about who these people really were, where they came from, whether they could truly have been the native peoples of the Americas, or whether someone else from across an ocean must have been involved. It is a controversy that says as much about us as it does about the Olmec, and we will confront it honestly. So we are left standing before the giant heads with questions on every side. Where did this civilization come from, appearing so suddenly in the lowland jungle? Who are the faces in the stone, and why do they spark such debate? How did a people without the wheel, without draft animals, move many tons of stone through swamp and forest to carve them? What was the writing they left that we still cannot read? Why did they vanish? And the greatest question of all, were the Olmec the mother culture of the entire Mesoamerican world, the root from which the Maya and the Aztec and all the rest would grow, the first civilization from which a whole world of civilizations descended? Tonight, we go into the green to meet the first great civilization of the Americas. We stand before the colossal heads. We confront the controversy over the faces. We follow the basalt through the jungle, decipher what we can of the lost writing, and trace the Olmec from their sudden rise to their silent fall. And we ask, at the last, what they gave to the world that came after. The first Americans to build a civilization are waiting in the stone, in the green. Let us go and meet them. Welcome. When we think of the great civilizations of ancient Mexico and Central America, the names that come to mind are usually two. The Maya, with their soaring temple pyramids rising above the rainforest, their astonishing calendar, their hieroglyphic writing, and the Aztec, with their island capital, their vast empire, their dramatic and terrible grandeur, encountered and destroyed at the moment of European contact. These are the famous ones, the civilizations of the school books and the documentaries, the peoples whose achievements have captured the world's imagination. But both of them, the Maya and the Aztec, came late. Both of them inherited a world that had already been shaped, a template that had already been laid down by a people who came long before, a people most of the world has never heard of, the Olmec. The Olmec are the first great civilization of Mesoamerica, the oldest complex society we know of in the region that would later give rise to the Maya, the Aztec, and all the rest. They flourished in the lowlands of the Gulf Coast of southern Mexico, and their great age came deep in antiquity, more than 3,000 years ago, at a time when much of the later Mesoamerican world had not yet even begun. When we say the Olmec came first, we mean it in the fullest sense. They were the pioneers, the founders, the civilization at the very beginning of the whole Mesoamerican story. Everything that came after in that part of the world came after them. And yet, despite this founding importance, the Olmec remain strangely obscure, known to specialists and enthusiasts, but largely absent from the popular imagination. There is a poignancy in this, that the people who came first, who laid the foundations, who may have been the source of so much that followed, are the ones most people have never heard of, overshadowed by the more famous civilizations that rose upon the ground they prepared. Part of what we are doing tonight is bringing the Olmec out of that obscurity, giving the first civilization of the Americas its due, letting the founders step forward from behind the fame of their successors. The very name we use for them, Olmec, is itself a reminder of how much we do not know. It is not their own name for themselves. We have no idea what they called themselves, because their language is lost, and their writing, though it exists, cannot yet be read. The name Olmec was applied to them later, derived from a term used by a much later people, and it means, roughly, something like the rubber people, referring to the rubber trees of their lowland region. So even the name by which we know this founding civilization is a borrowed label, applied from outside, long after they were gone. The people who may have been the mother culture of Mesoamerica are known to us by a name that was never theirs, a small measure of how much of them has been lost. And a great deal has been lost, which is why the Olmec are such a profound mystery. The lowland environment where they lived, humid, hot, densely vegetated, is hard on the traces of the past. Organic materials rot. Structures of earth erode and are overgrown. The jungle swallows what people leave behind. And so much of the Olmec world has vanished or lies buried and difficult to reach, leaving us with a fragmentary picture, a civilization glimpsed through gaps in the green, known mainly from the durable things that survived, the stone monuments, the carved jade, the earthworks, while so much else has dissolved back into the earth. The Olmec are mysterious in part because the record of them is so incomplete, so much having been lost to the climate and the jungle and the depth of time. But what survives is extraordinary, and it poses a whole series of genuine mysteries, real questions that scholars actively debate, not manufactured puzzles, but authentic uncertainties about one of the most important civilizations in the human story. And this brings me to the honest frame that will guide us tonight, because with the Olmec, as with the other subjects we have explored, it is essential to distinguish the genuine mysteries from the sensational claims and to be clear at every step about which is which. Here is what is genuinely mysterious and genuinely fascinating about the Olmec. Their origins are real puzzles. The question of how this complex civilization arose and what came before it being difficult to answer because the early record is so hard to see. The colossal heads are a genuine wonder, real monuments of astonishing scale and artistry, posing real questions about how and why they were made. The transport of the enormous stones across difficult terrain by a people without the wheel for hauling and without draft animals is a genuine achievement demanding genuine explanation. Their writing, the earliest in the Americas, is a real and unsolved puzzle, a script we cannot yet read. Their decline and disappearance is a real historical question, and the great debate over whether they were the mother culture of all Mesoamerica or one sister culture among several is a genuine, live, scholarly argument. These are all real mysteries, worthy of serious exploration. And here is what belongs to the realm of sensational and unsupported claims, which we will address honestly. There is the notion born from the appearance of the colossal heads that the Olmec were founded by or descended from peoples from across the ocean, from Africa or elsewhere, a claim of transatlantic contact for which the archaeological evidence is absent and which the scholarly consensus rejects. And there are the broader fringe notions that attach to any impressive ancient civilization, that it required outside intervention, lost technology, or some source beyond the ordinary capabilities of the people who actually lived there. These claims we will examine directly and honestly, and we will find that they do not hold up, and that the truth, as so often, is both more grounded and more magnificent than the speculation. So that is our method, the same honest method throughout. We will feel the full wonder of the real Olmec achievements, which need no exaggeration. We will confront the genuine mysteries with the seriousness they deserve, and we will examine the sensational claims honestly, distinguishing always between what the evidence supports and what it does not. And running through it all will be a theme that we have met before in our journeys, and that is especially important here: the recovery of the genius of the people who actually did these things, the recognition that the first civilization of the Americas was the achievement of Native American peoples, and that the impulse to attribute it to someone else from somewhere else is a failure to grant them the credit they are due. Here is the road ahead. We will begin with the appearance of the Olmec, the seeming suddenness of their rise in the lowland jungle, and the honest nuance behind that appearance. We will stand before the colossal heads and feel their full wonder. We will confront directly the controversy over the faces and what the evidence really says. We will follow the enormous stones across the landscape and ask how they were moved. We will examine the earliest writing in the Americas. We will explore the religion and the inner world of the Olmec, the were-jaguar and the gods and the ball game. We will trace their decline and disappearance. We will weigh the great debate, mother culture or sister culture, and we will gather, at the last, the legacy of the Olmec and the real wonder of what they achieved. The first civilization of the Americas is waiting to be understood. Let us go into the green and watch a civilization appear. To meet the Olmec, we have to go to their homeland, to the particular corner of the world where this first civilization arose. And it is not the kind of place where you might expect a great civilization to be born. It is not a fertile river valley of the classic kind, not a highland plateau, not a Mediterranean coast. It is a hot, humid, low-lying land of swamp and jungle and slow rivers on the southern coast of the Gulf of Mexico. And out of this green and steaming lowland, more than 3,000 years ago, the first complex civilization of the Americas emerged. Let us go there and watch it appear. The Olmec heartland lay along the Gulf Coast of what is now southern Mexico, in a region of tropical lowlands, a landscape of humid forest, of rivers winding toward the sea, of seasonal floods and rich alluvial soil, of swamp and jungle and abundant water. It was a challenging environment in some ways, hot and wet and thick with vegetation. But it was also a rich one, with fertile soils deposited by the rivers, with abundant water, with the resources of forest and river and coast. It was a land that could support agriculture, that could feed a growing population, that could, given the right combination of factors, sustain the rise of a complex society, and it did. At the heart of the early Olmec world stood a great center that archaeologists call San Lorenzo. This was one of the first, and for a time the greatest, of the Olmec centers, a place that rose to prominence deep in antiquity and became the seat of Olmec power and culture in its early florescence. San Lorenzo was not a city in the later sense, not a dense metropolis of streets and stone buildings, but it was a major center, a place of concentrated population and power, of monumental construction and elite authority, of art and ritual and craft. It sat on a great elevated platform, partly natural and partly shaped by enormous human effort, raised above the surrounding floodplain, a center of the Olmec world, overlooking the rivers and the lowlands. And the scale of what was accomplished at San Lorenzo is the first sign of the sophistication of Olmec civilization, because building such a center in such an environment required enormous organized effort. The great platform on which San Lorenzo sat involved the movement of vast quantities of earth, shaped and raised by human labor, a monumental undertaking. The center supported a substantial population sustained by agriculture in the surrounding lands. It was a place of monumental art, including the colossal heads, which required, as we will see, staggering effort to create. It was a place of elite power, of rulers who could command the labor of many and the resources of a wide region. San Lorenzo was, in short, the seat of a genuine civilization, complex, organized, sophisticated, and it arose in the lowland jungle deep in antiquity, before any other center of comparable complexity in the Americas. And this is where the sense of astonishment arises, the sense captured in the phrase that the Olmecs seem to appear from nowhere. Because when we look at the archaeological record, the Olmec civilization at San Lorenzo and in the broader heartland appears with what seems like startling suddenness, a complex society emerging in the lowlands without an obvious visible sequence of gradual development leading up to it. One moment in the record as we can see it, there is no complex civilization in the Americas. And then, relatively suddenly, there is the Olmec, already sophisticated, already monumental, already capable of the colossal heads and the great platforms and the elaborate art. It can seem as if a fully formed civilization simply appeared in the jungle, rising complete from the green with no apparent ancestors. This apparent suddenness is real as a feature of the record, and it is part of what has made the Olmec so mysterious and so magnetic to speculation. A civilization that seems to appear fully formed without visible predecessors invites the imagination to fill the gap, to wonder where it came from, to reach, in some cases, for extraordinary explanations, outside origins, lost sources, some external impetus that brought civilization suddenly to the lowland jungle. The seeming appearance from nowhere is one of the roots of the wilder theories about the Olmec, the sense that such a sudden emergence must have an extraordinary cause. But here we must apply our honest nuance, because the appearance from nowhere, while real as a feature of the visible record, is misleading as a description of what actually happened, and understanding why is crucial. The Olmec did not literally appear from nowhere. No civilization does. What we are seeing is not a true absence of predecessors, but a gap in our ability to see them, and that gap has real and understandable causes. Consider the environment again. The Olmec heartland is a lowland of humid jungle, of seasonal flooding, of rivers that deposit sediment and shift their courses, of dense vegetation and rapid decay. This is one of the worst possible environments for the preservation and discovery of early archaeological traces. The remains of the earlier, simpler societies that must have preceded and led up to the Olmec, the villages, the gradual developments, the slow accumulation of complexity, would have been made largely of perishable materials, would have been modest in scale, and would now lie buried under later deposits, under accumulated sediment, under jungle, difficult to find and difficult to excavate. The early stages of the developments that produced the Olmec are in large part hidden from us, not because they did not happen, but because the environment has hidden them. So the honest picture is this: the Olmec did not spring from nothing. They were the culmination of a longer process of development, of gradually increasing social complexity, of the slow rise of agriculture and population and organization and elite power over generations in the lowlands and perhaps in neighboring regions. That process of development is what produced the Olmec civilization we can see. But the early stages of that process are largely invisible to us, obscured by the difficult environment, buried and overgrown and hard to reach. What looks like a sudden appearance is really the emergence into visibility of a civilization whose gradual development we cannot easily see. The Olmec are the visible peak of an iceberg whose base is hidden beneath the jungle and the sediment and the depth of time. And this honest nuance matters enormously because it dissolves the false mystery while preserving the real one. The false mystery is the idea that the Olmec appeared magically from nowhere, requiring some extraordinary external cause. That is not what happened, and the seeming suddenness is an artifact of the incomplete record, not a real event needing a miraculous explanation. But the real mystery remains, and it is genuine and fascinating. We genuinely do not fully understand the process by which the Olmec civilization arose, because so much of the early record is hidden. We would love to see that gradual development, to trace the steps by which complexity emerged in the lowlands. But the environment has largely denied us that view. The real mystery is not that the Olmec appeared from nowhere, but that the story of their emergence is largely hidden from us, and that we are left with the sophisticated civilization already in place, its origins obscured. That is a genuine and legitimate mystery, and it does not require and is not evidence for any extraordinary external source. What we can say with confidence and with wonder is that by the time the Olmec become clearly visible to us, they were already a genuine and sophisticated civilization, the first in the Americas. They had monumental centers like San Lorenzo. They had elite rulers commanding great labor. They had extraordinary art, including the colossal heads. They had a complex society, an economy, a religion, and, as we will see, the beginnings of writing. They were, in every meaningful sense, a civilization, complex and organized and creative, and they were the first of their kind in the Americas, the founders, the pioneers, arising in the lowland jungle deep in antiquity through a process of development that we can infer but largely cannot see. And of all the things this first civilization created, none is more famous, more astonishing, or more evocative than the great stone faces, the colossal heads that stare out of the green to this day. They are the signature of the Olmec, the image by which the world knows them, and they are one of the genuine wonders of the ancient Americas. Let us go now and stand before them and feel the full force of the colossal heads. They are the image that defines the Olmec, the wonder that draws the eye and holds it, the monuments that more than anything else have carried the memory of this first civilization down to us. The colossal heads, enormous faces carved from single blocks of solid stone, staring out across 3,000 years with an expression of such presence, such individuality, such humanity, that to stand before one is to feel yourself in the gaze of a person who lived and died in the deepest antiquity of the Americas. Let us stand before them now and take in the full wonder of what the Olmec made. Let us begin with the basic facts, which are astonishing in themselves. Archaeologists have found a number of these colossal heads, something like 17 of them, discovered at the major Olmec centers, at San Lorenzo and Venta and other sites. 17 giant stone faces, each one a monument, each one carved from a single massive block of stone. And their size is staggering. The largest of them stand as tall as a person or taller, some reaching heights of 3 meters or more, great blocks of stone shaped into human faces on a scale that dwarfs the viewer. And their weight is immense. These are not modest carvings. Each colossal head weighs many tons, the largest reaching weights of many tens of tons, 20, 30, 40 tons or more of solid stone, shaped into a human face. To stand before one is to stand before a mountain of stone that has been transformed into a portrait, and the material is crucial and part of the wonder. The colossal heads were carved from basalt, a hard, heavy volcanic rock. Basalt is not a soft, easily worked stone. It is dense and tough, demanding great skill and effort to carve. And crucially, the basalt did not come from where the heads were made. There was no basalt in the immediate lowland environment of the Olmec centers. The stone had to be obtained from sources far away, from volcanic mountains at a considerable distance, and transported in enormous blocks weighing many tons across the lowlands to the centers where the heads were carved. We will devote a whole part of our journey to the staggering question of how this transport was accomplished. But for now, simply hold the fact. The very stone of the colossal heads was brought from distant mountains. Many tons of hard volcanic rock moved across swamp and jungle to become these faces. The heads are a wonder not only of carving but of transport before a single chisel stroke was made. Now let us look at the faces themselves, because this is where the true marvel lies, and where the heads become not just impressive but deeply moving. Each colossal head is a human face, and each one is different. These are not identical, mass-produced images, not a single stereotyped form repeated. Each head is an individual with its own distinct features, its own expression, its own character. One face is broad and stern, another seems younger or softer or more contemplative. The features vary, the proportions vary, the expressions vary. Each head seems to be a portrait, the likeness of a particular person, carved with enough individuality that we feel we are looking at a specific human being, not a generic type. And this individuality is one of the most striking and poignant things about the colossal heads. They are portraits, they are people. And who were these people? The scholarly understanding, based on the individuality of the faces and other features, is that the colossal heads most likely represent rulers, the powerful leaders of the Olmec centers. Each head, on this understanding, is the portrait of a particular ruler, a king or a chief or a great lord, immortalized in stone, his likeness preserved on a monumental scale as an assertion of his power and his memory. The heads were, in this sense, monuments of rulership, images of the individuals who held power in the Olmec world, carved to endure, to proclaim and preserve the identity and the authority of the leaders they depicted. When we look into the face of a colossal head, we may be looking into the face of an Olmec king who ruled 3,000 years ago. Consider the details that support this, because they add to the sense of individuality and rulership. Each head wears a distinctive covering, a close-fitting headdress or helmet, often unique to that particular head, with its own design, its own emblems, its own decorative elements. These headdresses may have carried meaning, identifying the individual, marking his status or his lineage or his role, functioning almost like a personal insignia. The variation in the headdresses reinforces the individuality of the heads, each ruler marked by his own distinctive covering. And the faces themselves are rendered with care and skill, the features modeled with real artistry, the expressions given a presence and a dignity that speak of accomplished sculptors working to honor and preserve the images of their lords. Now pause and try to feel the full weight of what this means, because it is genuinely extraordinary. More than 3,000 years ago, in the lowland jungle of the Gulf Coast, a civilization obtained many tons of hard volcanic basalt from distant mountains, transported it across difficult terrain by means we still marvel at, and carved it with skill and artistry into monumental portraits of their rulers, individual human faces on a colossal scale, each one distinct, each one a person. This is not the work of a simple or primitive society. It is the work of a sophisticated civilization with powerful rulers, organized labor, skilled artists, long-distance resource networks, and a monumental artistic vision. The colossal heads are proof in stone of the sophistication and the achievement of the Olmec, the first civilization of the Americas. And there is something in the experience of standing before a colossal head that goes beyond the facts, something that reaches across the millennia and touches you directly. It is the gaze. The faces look out, and they seem to look at you with an expression that is calm, dignified, watchful, present. There is a humanity in them, an individuality that collapses the distance of 3,000 years. You are looking at a face, a human face, carved by human hands to preserve the memory of a human being. And that face is looking back. There is an intimacy in it, a directness that few ancient monuments possess. The pyramids overwhelm with their scale, but they do not look at you. The colossal heads do. They meet your eyes across 3,000 years, the faces of the first Americans to build a civilization, gazing out of the stone, refusing to be forgotten. The colossal heads are, in every way, a genuine wonder, requiring no exaggeration to astonish. Their scale, their material, their transport, their artistry, their individuality, all of it is real and all of it is magnificent. They are one of the great achievements of the ancient Americas, the signature of the Olmec civilization, portraits of rulers who lived 3,000 years ago, staring out of the jungle to this day. But those faces, so individual, so human, so present, have also been the source of a long and heated controversy. Because when people in modern times first looked closely at the features of the colossal heads, some saw in them things that surprised them, things that did not match their assumptions, and they began to ask questions and to propose answers that would spark a debate lasting a century and touching on some of the most sensitive issues in the whole study of the ancient Americas. The faces that meet our eyes so directly have also divided opinion, and we must confront that controversy honestly. Let us turn now to the faces that spark controversy and to what the evidence really says. We come now to the most sensitive part of the whole Olmec story, and I want to approach it with special care because it touches on questions that have been handled over the years with a great deal of carelessness and sometimes with real harm. The colossal heads, with their broad features and their individual faces, have been at the center of a long controversy, a debate about who the Olmec really were and where they came from. And that debate deserves to be treated honestly, seriously, and with respect, both for the evidence and for the people it concerns. So let us confront it directly, understand why it arose, present the claims at their most serious, examine what the evidence actually shows, and draw out the deeper lesson it holds. Here is how the controversy began. When observers in modern times looked closely at the faces of the colossal heads, some of them felt that the features, the broad noses, the full lips, the particular proportions of the faces looked to their eyes like the features of peoples from Africa. And from this impression, a hypothesis was born, a hypothesis that has been repeated and debated for many decades. The hypothesis is that these African-seeming features indicate a connection between the Olmec and Africa, that peoples from across the Atlantic reached the Americas in antiquity before the Olmec and influenced or even founded the Olmec civilization, and that the colossal heads are portraits of these African visitors or their descendants. It is a claim of transatlantic contact in deep antiquity, with Africa as the source and the colossal heads as the evidence. Let me present this hypothesis in its most serious and sympathetic form, because it deserves that, and because the caricature of it is not worth engaging with. In its serious form, the hypothesis is part of a broader and legitimate scholarly interest in the possibility of ancient contacts across the oceans. The question of whether peoples from different continents might have reached the Americas before the well-documented voyages of much later times. This is a real and interesting question in principle, and the possibility of ancient transoceanic contact is not absurd on its face, since human beings have been capable seafarers for a very long time. And some of those who have advanced the African Olmec hypothesis have done so not out of any desire to diminish Native Americans, but out of a sincere interest in the connections between peoples, and even in some cases, out of a desire to celebrate the achievements and the reach of ancient African civilizations. So, let us grant the hypothesis its most serious and good faith form. A genuine inquiry into the possibility of ancient contact based on an honest impression of the faces. And now let us examine what the evidence actually shows, honestly and carefully, because this is where the hypothesis, however sincerely held, does not hold up, and the evidence points clearly in a different direction. First, consider the features themselves and what explains them. The features of the colossal heads, the broad noses and full lips and particular proportions do not require any African origin to explain, because they are well within the range of the features of Native American peoples, the indigenous populations of the region, and they are rendered, moreover, in a particular artistic style. Art is not photography. The Olmec sculptors worked in a distinctive style, with distinctive conventions for rendering the human face, and the features of the heads reflect that artistic style as much as they reflect the literal appearance of any individual. The broad, powerful features of the heads are characteristic of Olmec art in general, a stylistic signature, and they are entirely consistent with the sculptors depicting the Native American rulers of their own society in their own artistic idiom. There is nothing in the features that requires an African origin, and much that points to their being stylized portraits of the indigenous people of the region. Second, and most importantly, consider the total absence of the other evidence that genuine contact would leave. If peoples from Africa had reached the Americas in antiquity and influenced or founded the Olmec civilization, they would have left traces, many kinds of traces, and those traces are absent. There is no genetic evidence of an African presence in the ancient populations of the region, no African ancestry showing up in the DNA of the ancient or the descendant populations, as there would be if African peoples had settled and mixed there. There is no archaeological evidence of African material culture, no African artifacts, no African technologies, no African styles appearing in the Olmec world. There is no botanical evidence, no African plants or crops carried across and cultivated as contact would likely have brought. There is no evidence of the African diseases that contact would have introduced. In short, none of the many kinds of evidence that a genuine transatlantic contact and influence would have left behind are present. And this absence is decisive because real contact between populations leaves real, multiple converging traces, and here those traces are simply not there. Third, consider the difficulties of the contact itself and the questions of timing and origin. The hypothesis requires a transatlantic voyage in deep antiquity, from Africa to the Americas, at a time and by means for which there is no evidence crossing a vast ocean. And it requires this to have happened at the right time to influence or found the Olmec, a specific and demanding requirement. The archaeological and chronological picture does not support such a scenario. The Olmec civilization, as we have seen, arose from the developments of the region itself, the culmination of local and regional processes, not from an external founding. The evidence for the Olmec is evidence of an indigenous American civilization developing in its own region, in its own way, with no sign of the external African origin the hypothesis requires. So the honest verdict is clear. The scholarly consensus, based on the evidence, rejects the African Olmec contact hypothesis. The features of the colossal heads are explained by the indigenous population of the region and the artistic style of the Olmec sculptors, not by any African origin. And the many kinds of evidence that genuine contact would have left, genetic, archaeological, botanical, are absent. The colossal heads are portraits of Native American rulers carved by Native American artists in a Native American civilization that arose in the Americas. That is what the evidence shows. But I do not want to leave this merely as a negative conclusion, a debunking, because there is a deeper and more important lesson here, one that connects to a theme we have met before in our journeys, and that lies at the very heart of this whole documentary, and it is this: The impulse to attribute the Olmec achievement to outsiders, to peoples from across the ocean, however sincerely it may sometimes be held, is an example of a troubling and recurring pattern, the pattern of denying to native and indigenous peoples the credit for their own achievements. Think about the structure of the claim. It looks at the colossal heads, at this magnificent achievement of the first American civilization. And it says, in effect, that the people who actually lived there, the Native Americans of the region, could not or did not do this themselves, that it must have come from somewhere else, from some other people, from across an ocean. And that move, whatever its intentions, takes the achievement away from the people who actually accomplished it and gives it to outsiders. It is the same move we encountered at Baalbek, where the instinct was to attribute the colossal stones to giants or lost civilizations, rather than to the human beings who actually raised them. It is the same move that has been made again and again about the great achievements of non-European peoples around the world, the assumption that they must have had outside help, that they could not have done it themselves. And it is, at bottom, a failure to grant these peoples the full measure of their own genius. The history of this particular pattern applied to the Americas is especially troubling, because for a long time there was a persistent tendency to underestimate the achievements of Native American civilizations, to assume that the impressive works of the ancient Americas must have required outside influence or origin, whether from lost continents, from ancient voyagers, from anywhere but the Native American peoples themselves. This tendency has deep roots in old prejudices, in the reluctance to credit indigenous peoples with the sophistication and the achievement that their monuments so plainly demonstrate. And the African Olmec hypothesis, whatever the good intentions of some who have held it, participates in this pattern by seeking the source of the Olmec achievement outside the Native American world. So the honest and the just conclusion is not only that the evidence rejects the African contact hypothesis, but that the Olmec achievement belongs to the Olmec, to the Native American peoples who created it. The colossal heads are the work of indigenous American genius, of a Native American civilization that obtained and transported and carved many tons of basalt into monumental portraits of its own rulers in its own artistic style 3,000 years ago. To recognize this is not to diminish the wonder of the heads, but to locate it correctly, to give the credit where it belongs, to the founding civilization of the Americas and the remarkable people who built it. The deepest answer to the controversy over the faces is to look into those faces and see them for what they are, the portraits of the first Americans to build a civilization made by their own hands in their own land. Having confronted the controversy honestly, we can return to the wonder of the Olmec achievement with clear eyes, and to one of its most staggering dimensions, the question we deferred earlier, the sheer physical challenge of the colossal heads. Because those many tons of basalt did not come from where the heads were carved. They came from distant mountains, and they were moved across swamp and jungle by a people without the wheel and without draft animals. How was that possible? Let us turn now to the astonishing feat of moving mountains without the wheel. We return now to a wonder we set aside earlier, and it is one of the most genuinely astonishing achievements of the Olmec, an achievement that rivals the carving of the colossal heads themselves, and in some ways exceeds it. Before a single head could be carved, the stone had to be obtained and moved. And the stone, many tons of hard volcanic basalt, did not lie ready to hand in the lowland jungle where the Olmec center stood. It had to be brought from far away, from distant mountains, across difficult terrain by a people who lacked two things we would consider essential for such a task. They had no wheel for hauling, and they had no draft animals. And yet they did it, moving mountains of stone across the landscape by human ingenuity and human effort alone. Let us confront this feat and understand it honestly. Begin with the challenge in its full dimensions because it is formidable. The basalt for the colossal heads and for other Olmec monuments came from volcanic sources at a considerable distance from the centers where the heads were carved, from mountains that lay tens of kilometers away across the intervening lowlands. And the blocks that had to be moved were enormous, weighing many tons, up to many tens of tons, the raw material for heads that would weigh 20, 30, 40 tons or more. So the task was to move blocks of stone weighing many tons across tens of kilometers of difficult lowland terrain, from the volcanic mountains to the lowland centers. That is the challenge in its bare form, and it is staggering. Now add the two great constraints, the things the Olmec did not have. First, they did not have the wheel in any useful form for this task. It is a famous fact about the civilizations of the ancient Americas that they did not use the wheel for transport and haulage as the civilizations of the Old World did. There is evidence that the concept of the wheel was known, appearing on small objects that may have been toys or ritual items, but the wheel was not developed into wheeled vehicles for moving loads. So the Olmec could not simply load the stones onto wheeled carts and haul them. That option, so basic to Old World monumental transport, was not available to them. Second, and equally important, they did not have draft animals, the large domesticated animals that Old World civilizations used to pull and carry heavy loads. The Americas lacked the horses, the oxen, the other large draft animals that elsewhere provided the muscle for moving great weights. There were no teams of oxen to hitch to a sledge, no beasts of burden to haul the stone, so the Olmec could not rely on animal power for the transport. Whatever moved the stones had to be human power, the muscle of many people working together, unaided by draft animals and unassisted by the wheel. So consider the position, blocks of stone weighing many tons to be moved tens of kilometers across lowland terrain without the wheel and without draft animals, by human power alone. How on earth was it done? This is a genuine and legitimate wonder, and it demands a real answer. And the answer, as best we can reconstruct it, is a combination of ingenious methods and enormous organized human effort. And it turns out that the very landscape that posed the challenge also offered a crucial solution. The crucial solution was water. The Olmec heartland, remember, was a land of rivers, a lowland, laced with waterways winding toward the Gulf. And water transport is the key that makes the whole feat comprehensible, because moving heavy loads by water is vastly easier than moving them over land. A block of stone that would be nearly immovable on land can be floated or nearly floated on water, its weight borne by buoyancy, transported on rafts or barges along rivers and waterways with a fraction of the effort that overland haulage would require. And the Olmec appear to have made extensive use of water transport, moving the great basalt blocks by river on rafts or balsas along the natural waterways that connected much of their world. The rivers were their roads, and water transport was the means by which the heaviest stones could be moved across long distances with the resources they had. Picture it. The basalt blocks, quarried from the distant volcanic mountains, brought down to the waterways, loaded onto rafts, and floated along the rivers, across the lowlands, toward the centers, water bearing the weight that no wheel and no animal could bear. the great stones moving slowly along the rivers through the green landscape, carried by the current and guided by human hands in a journey of many kilometers from the mountains to the centers where they would become the colossal heads. Water transport transforms the seemingly impossible into the achievable, and it was very likely central to how the Olmec moved their mountains of stone. But water alone did not solve the whole problem, because the stones had to be moved over land as well, from the quarries to the water, and from the water to the centers. And these overland stretches, though shorter, still required moving many tons of stone without the wheel or draft animals. And here the Olmec relied on the same kinds of methods that human beings have used around the world to move great weights by muscle power. They likely used sledges on which the blocks could be placed and dragged. They likely used rollers, logs placed beneath the loads to ease their movement. They likely prepared and smoothed the paths, perhaps lubricating them to reduce friction. And above all, they used massed human labor, large numbers of people hauling together, applying their combined strength through ropes and levers, moving the great stones by the coordinated effort of many. The overland transport was a matter of human muscle, organized and multiplied, dragging the stones on sledges and rollers along prepared paths, from the quarries to the water and from the water to the centers. Put it all together, and you have a comprehensible, if still astonishing, picture of how the feat was accomplished. The stones were quarried in the distant mountains. They were moved overland to the waterways by sledges, rollers, and massed human effort. They were floated along the rivers by raft, water bearing their great weight across the long distances. And they were moved overland again, from the water to the centers by the same methods of human muscle. It was a feat of enormous labor, of great organization, of ingenious use of the landscape and the waterways, and of the coordinated effort of many people. But it was achievable by these means, without the wheel and without draft animals, through human ingenuity and human effort. The Olmec moved their mountains of stone by understanding their landscape, exploiting their rivers, and organizing the labor of their people. And let us be honest, as always, about what we know and what we infer. We do not have a complete, documented, step-by-step record of exactly how each stone was moved, the precise routes, the exact methods at each stage, the specific techniques used for the overland portions. Much of our picture is reconstruction and inference based on the landscape, the likely use of water transport, and the known methods of moving great weights by human power. The details remain in part uncertain, and there is genuine ongoing study of exactly how the transport was accomplished. But the general picture, water transport along the rivers combined with overland haulage by sledge and roller and massed labor, is well-founded and sufficient to explain the feat, requiring no lost technology, no impossible capabilities, no outside intervention. It required only what the Olmec genuinely had, an intimate knowledge of their landscape, the ingenious use of their waterways, and the organized effort of a sophisticated society. And here, once again, we arrive at the deeper truth that runs through this whole documentary. The transport of the colossal stones, like the carving of the heads, was the achievement of the Olmec themselves, of Native American ingenuity and organization and effort. It did not require the wheel, which they did not have. It did not require draft animals, which they did not have. It did not require any capability beyond those of the people who actually lived there. It required human intelligence applied to a real landscape, the understanding that rivers could bear what wheels could not, and the organization of human labor to accomplish the rest. The moving of the mountains is not evidence of outside help or lost technology. It is evidence of the genius of the Olmec, of what a sophisticated Native American civilization could accomplish with ingenuity and effort and an intimate knowledge of its own world. The stones moved because the Olmec were clever and organized and determined. And that is a more impressive truth than any tale of lost technology could be. We have seen the Olmec obtain and move and carve their mountains of stone. Now let us turn to another of their achievements, subtler than the colossal heads, but in its own way just as significant and just as mysterious. Because the Olmec did not only carve faces, they may also have carved words. They appear to have possessed the earliest writing in all of the Americas, a system of signs and symbols that we have found but cannot yet read. Let us turn now to the first American writing and to the mystery of a script we cannot decipher. Beyond the colossal heads, beyond the monumental art and the great earthworks, the Olmec may have achieved something subtler and in its own way even more profound. They may have been the first people in all of the Americas to write. Among the traces they left behind are signs and symbols that appear to be writing or the beginnings of writing, a system for recording language in visible marks, older than any other known writing in the Americas. And like so much about the Olmec, this earliest American writing is both a genuine achievement and a genuine mystery, because we have found it, but we cannot read it. Let us turn to the first American writing and to the enigma of a script we cannot decipher. To appreciate the significance of this, we have to understand what writing means for a civilization and how rare and momentous its invention is. True writing, a system of visible signs that can record spoken language, is one of the most powerful technologies human beings have ever developed. It allows knowledge to be stored outside the human memory, transmitted across distance and across time, accumulated across generations. It transforms the possibilities of administration, of religion, of history, of thought itself. And true writing has been independently invented only a small number of times in all of human history, in only a few places around the world. It is one of the rarest and most consequential of human inventions, and the evidence suggests that the Olmec, or the world they were part of, achieved it independently in the Americas, making them one of the very few peoples in the entire history of the world to invent writing from scratch. The signs of Olmec writing appear in several forms and finds. There are symbols and glyphs that appear on Olmec monuments and artifacts, carved signs that seem to carry meaning, to represent something beyond mere decoration, elements of a system of communication in visible marks. There is iconography, a rich system of symbolic images that shades toward the symbolic and the script-like, conveying meaning through established conventions. And there are specific finds that have been interpreted as early writing, the most famous of which deserves special attention because it has been at the center of the debate over Olmec writing. That find is an object known as the Cascajal block. It is a slab of stone found in the Olmec heartland, bearing a series of carved signs, symbols arranged in a way that suggests writing, a sequence of glyphs that appear to follow the kind of patterns that written language produces. When it was studied and published, the Cascajal block was hailed by some as the earliest writing in the Americas, a genuine example of an Olmec script, evidence that the Olmec had developed a system of writing older than any other known in the hemisphere. The block bears a set of distinct signs, some of them repeated, arranged in sequences, exactly the kind of pattern one would expect from writing, from a system in which particular signs stand for particular elements of language, combined and recombined to convey meaning. Now, we must be honest, as always, about the debate and the uncertainty. because the interpretation of the Cascajal block and of Olmec writing in general is not entirely settled. Some scholars are confident that the block and other Olmec signs represent genuine writing, a true script recording language. Others are more cautious, noting the difficulties of proving that a set of signs constitutes true writing, as opposed to a system of symbols or iconography that carries meaning without being full writing in the strict sense. The line between true writing and other symbolic systems can be difficult to draw, especially with a small number of finds and no ability to read them. So there is genuine scholarly debate about exactly what the Olmec signs are, whether they constitute full writing or a precursor to it, and how to interpret specific finds like the Cascajal block. This is a real and legitimate uncertainty, part of the genuine mystery of the Olmec. But whether or not the Olmec signs constitute full writing in the strictest sense, they clearly represent something remarkable. An early system of meaningful signs at or near the origins of writing in the Americas, older than the writing of the later civilizations. And this brings us to the heart of the mystery, which is that we cannot read them. Whatever the Olmec signs recorded, whatever meanings they carried, whatever words or ideas or names they preserved, we cannot decipher them. The script, if it is a script, is undeciphered. The signs remain silent, their meanings locked away. A message from the first American civilization that we can see but cannot understand. Consider why this is so and how profound the silence is. To decipher an ancient script, scholars usually need certain things: a substantial body of text to study, some knowledge of the language the script records, and ideally some kind of key, a bilingual text or a known related language that can provide a way in. For the Olmec signs, these aids are largely absent. There is only a small body of these early signs, not a large corpus of texts to analyze. We do not know the language the Olmec spoke, cannot hear the words that the signs might have recorded. And there is no key, no bilingual text, no clearly related and readable script to unlock the meanings. So the Olmec signs remain undeciphered, a script or proto-script that we can see but not read, its meanings lost with the language and the people who created it. We are left looking at the marks, knowing they meant something, unable to recover what. There is something deeply poignant in this silence. The Olmec reached toward writing, toward the preservation of meaning in visible signs, toward the very technology that allows a civilization to speak across time. And yet, because their language is lost and their script undeciphered, their attempt to speak to the future has, in a sense, failed. The signs endure, but the voice is silent. We can see that the Olmec wanted to record something, to preserve names or events or sacred knowledge, but we cannot hear what they were saying. The first American writing is a message that reached us, but that we cannot open, a voice preserved but unheard, the Olmec speaking to us in signs we cannot understand. And this connects to the larger significance of Olmec writing, which reaches forward to everything that came after. Because the later civilizations of Mesoamerica, above all the Maya, developed writing to a high degree, the Maya script being one of the great writing systems of the ancient world, elaborate, sophisticated, and after enormous scholarly effort, substantially deciphered. And the question arises, where did Mesoamerican writing come from? Was the Olmec system the source, the origin, from which the later scripts, including the Maya, ultimately descended? If the Olmec invented writing in the Americas, then they may have been the source of the whole Mesoamerican tradition of writing, the founders of literacy in the hemisphere, the origin of a technology that would flower in the later civilizations. This possibility connects to the great debate we will reach later. the question of whether the Olmec were the mother culture from which the later civilizations drew so much. And writing is one of the key threads in that debate. So the first American writing is, like so much about the Olmec, a genuine achievement wrapped in genuine mystery. They reached toward writing, perhaps achieved it, becoming one of the few peoples in history to invent this most powerful of technologies. They left signs that we can see but cannot read, a script or protoscript silenced by the loss of their language. And they may have been the source of the whole Mesoamerican tradition of writing that flowered in the civilizations that followed. The Olmec signs are a message from the first American civilization, preserved in stone, waiting, perhaps forever, to be understood. The writing points us toward the inner world of the Olmec, toward the meanings they sought to record and preserve. And that inner world, their religion, their gods, their rituals, their vision of the sacred, is the next dimension of this civilization we must explore. Because the Olmec did not only build and carve and write, they believed and worshipped and shaped a religious and symbolic world that would echo through all the civilizations that came after them. Let us turn now to the gods and the jaguars and the shape of the Olmec religion. A civilization is not only its monuments and its technologies, it is also its inner world, its beliefs, its gods, its vision of the sacred and the supernatural, the meanings that animate its art and its ritual and its life. And the Olmec possessed a rich and sophisticated inner world, a religious and symbolic system that pervaded their art and their monuments, and that would echo in transformed forms through all the civilizations of Mesoamerica that came after them. To understand the Olmec fully, we must enter, as far as we can, their spiritual world, the world of gods and jaguars and sacred power that gave meaning to everything they made. Let us explore the shape of the Olmec religion. Let us begin with the most famous and distinctive element of Olmec religious imagery, a figure that appears again and again in their art, and that has become almost emblematic of Olmec belief. It is a supernatural being that combines human and feline features, blending the form of a person with the attributes of a jaguar, and it is often called the were-jaguar by analogy with the werewolf, a being that merges human and animal. The were-jaguar appears throughout Olmec art, in carvings and figurines and monuments, a distinctive supernatural figure with a particular combination of features, often including a downturned mouth, sometimes an infantile or otherworldly aspect, blending the human and the feline in a way that clearly carried deep religious meaning. Why the jaguar? The choice is not arbitrary, and it reveals something about the Olmec world and its sacred imagination. The jaguar was the great predator of the Olmec environment, the most powerful and awe-inspiring animal of the lowland jungle, a magnificent and dangerous creature, a master of the forest and the night. To a people living in that environment, the jaguar would have been a natural symbol of power, of ferocity, of the untamed and the supernatural, a being of the wild that inspired awe and fear. And so the jaguar became, in Olmec religion, a sacred animal, a symbol of power and of the supernatural, its attributes blended with the human in the figure of the were-jaguar, expressing perhaps the connection between human power and the power of the great predator, between rulers or shamans and the sacred force of the jaguar. The were-jaguar embodies the Olmec sense of the sacred as something powerful, wild, and awe-inspiring, drawn from the most formidable creature of their world. The were-jaguar is likely connected to a broader Olmec conception of the supernatural, to a world of gods and sacred forces that their art expresses, though we must be honest that our understanding of Olmec religion is limited, reconstructed from the imagery and the monuments without the aid of texts we can read. Scholars have identified in Olmec art what appear to be a number of supernatural beings or deities, recurring figures with particular attributes, suggesting a pantheon or a system of sacred beings, gods of the kind that would be elaborated in the later Mesoamerican religions. There appear to be beings associated with rain and maize and the forces of nature, with the sky and the earth and the powers that govern the world, the beginnings of the rich religious systems that would characterize Mesoamerica. The Olmecs seem to have developed early forms of many of the sacred concepts and beings that would echo through the later civilizations, the foundations of a religious tradition. And this points to one of the most significant things about Olmec religion, its role as a source and a foundation for the religious world of all the later Mesoamerican civilizations. Because when we look at the religions of the Maya, the Aztec, and the other later peoples, we find themes and figures and concepts that appear to have their roots in the Olmec world. The importance of the jaguar as a sacred animal continues through Mesoamerican religion. Deities associated with rain and maize and the natural forces foreshadowed in Olmec art become central figures in the later pantheons. Religious concepts and symbols that appear first among the Olmec recur, transformed in the civilizations that followed. The Olmecs seem to have laid down in their religion a template, a set of sacred concepts and figures and practices that the later civilizations would inherit and elaborate. The spiritual world of Mesoamerica, in all its later richness, appears to have deep roots in the Olmec. Beyond the gods and the supernatural beings, the Olmec developed practices and institutions that would also echo through the later civilizations, and two of these deserve particular mention because they became so central to the whole Mesoamerican tradition. The first is the ball game. Across Mesoamerica, in civilization after civilization, there was a sacred ball game played with a rubber ball on a special court, a game that was not merely sport, but carried deep religious and symbolic meaning associated with cosmic forces, with ritual, sometimes with sacrifice. And this ball game appears to have very deep roots, reaching back toward the Olmec, who lived in the region where rubber was produced, the very material of the ball, and who appear to have been among the originators of this profound Mesoamerican tradition. The ball game that would be played across Mesoamerica for millennia, laden with sacred meaning, seems to trace back toward the Olmec world, another of their foundational contributions to the civilizations that followed. The second is the practice of ritual and, in particular, of bloodletting and sacrifice, which became so central to Mesoamerican religion. The later civilizations practiced various forms of ritual bloodletting and sacrifice, offering blood to the gods as a sacred duty, and these practices appear to have early roots in the Mesoamerican world, with the Olmec participating in the development of the ritual traditions that would become so important later. The sacred landscape, the ritual centers, the ceremonial practices of the Olmec laid foundations for the elaborate religious systems of the later civilizations. And the Olmec expressed their religious world not only in the colossal heads, but in a whole range of exquisite art, which reveals the sophistication of their sacred vision. They were master workers of jade, the precious green stone, which they carved into figurines and ornaments and ritual objects of extraordinary beauty and craftsmanship, jade being deeply valued and imbued with sacred significance. They created figurines and sculptures expressing their religious concepts. the were-jaguar and the supernatural beings and the sacred themes of their world. They shaped sacred landscapes and ceremonial centers, arranging their monuments and their spaces according to religious principles. The art of the Olmec is not only technically accomplished, but spiritually rich, expressing a sophisticated and coherent religious vision, the inner world of the first American civilization. Stand back and consider what this means. The Olmec were not only builders and engineers and carvers of stone. They were a people with a deep and sophisticated spiritual life, a rich religious world of gods and sacred animals and supernatural beings, of ritual and ceremony and sacred landscape expressed in art of great beauty and meaning. And this spiritual world was not theirs alone. It became the foundation, the template, the source for the religious traditions of all the Mesoamerican civilizations that followed. The were-jaguar and the sacred jaguar, the gods of rain and maize, the ball game, the rituals, the whole shape of Mesoamerican religion tracing back toward its roots in the Olmec. In their inner world, as in their monuments, the Olmec were founders, laying down the spiritual foundations of a whole civilization tradition. This role as founders, as the source of so much that the later civilizations inherited, brings us toward the great debate that lies at the heart of Olmec studies, the question of just how foundational they really were. But before we reach that debate, we must confront another mystery, the mystery of their end. Because this great founding civilization, after centuries of achievement, declined and disappeared. Its centers fell silent. Its monuments were in some cases deliberately defaced and buried. The Olmec vanished from history, leaving their successors to inherit what they had begun. Why? What happened to the Olmec? Let us turn now to the vanishing. Every civilization we have explored eventually comes to its end, and the Olmec are no exception. After centuries of achievement, of monumental art and sophisticated religion and founding influence, the Olmec civilization declined and disappeared. Their great centers, one after another, fell silent. Their monuments, in some cases, were deliberately defaced and buried. And the people we call the Olmec passed out of history, leaving their achievements to be inherited by the civilizations that followed. Why? What happened to the first civilization of the Americas? Let us turn to the mystery of the vanishing and, as always, examine it honestly, including the crucial question of what disappearance really means. The decline of the Olmec was not a single event, but a process, unfolding over time, and it can be traced through the fate of their great centers. Recall that the Olmec had a sequence of major centers, rising and falling across the span of their civilization. The early great center of San Lorenzo flourished for a time and then declined, losing its preeminence, its great age passing. And as San Lorenzo declined, another center rose to prominence, La Venta, which became the great Olmec center of a later phase, flourishing in its turn, raising its own monuments, including great earthen structures and its own colossal heads and sculptures. La Venta became for a time the leading center of the Olmec world, carrying the civilization forward after the decline of San Lorenzo. But then La Venta too declined and was abandoned. The great center that had carried Olmec civilization through its later phase fell silent, its monuments abandoned, its role as a center of power and culture ending. And with the decline of La Venta and the other late centers, the Olmec civilization, as a distinct and flourishing entity, came to its end. The great age of the Olmec, the age of the monumental centers and the colossal heads and the founding achievements, drew to a close, the centers falling silent one after another until the classic Olmec world had passed away. There's a particularly haunting and mysterious dimension to the end of the Olmec centers, one that has intrigued and puzzled scholars. At some of the centers, there is evidence that monuments were deliberately defaced, damaged, or buried. Great sculptures, including colossal heads and other monuments, show signs of intentional mutilation, of deliberate damage inflicted upon them, and some were carefully buried, hidden in the earth. This deliberate defacement and burial of the monuments is a genuine mystery, and its meaning is uncertain and debated. Why would the Olmec or someone deliberately deface and bury these great monuments, these portraits of rulers, these sacred sculptures? Several possibilities have been suggested, and they are worth considering because they touch on the meaning of the Olmec collapse. Perhaps the defacement reflects social upheaval, a rejection or overthrow of the old order, the monuments of the rulers being deliberately destroyed as part of a rebellion or a repudiation of the powers they represented, the images of fallen rulers mutilated by those who cast them down. Perhaps it reflects religious or ritual practices, the deliberate deactivation of monuments as part of a ritual process, the ceremonial retirement of sacred objects, the burial being a form of ritual interment rather than destruction. Perhaps it reflects the actions of later peoples or the complex processes by which the centers were abandoned. The truth is uncertain, and the deliberate defacement and burial of the monuments remains one of the genuine mysteries of the Olmec end, a haunting sign of some upheaval or transformation whose exact nature we cannot fully recover. But whatever its cause, it speaks of an ending that involved not just gradual decline, but in some cases deliberate action against the symbols of the old order. What caused the decline of the Olmec centers? Here we are in the realm of genuine uncertainty, of theories and possibilities rather than established answers, because the causes of the Olmec decline are not definitively known. But several factors have been proposed, and they are the kinds of factors that contribute to the decline of civilizations generally. There are environmental factors. The Olmec lived in a lowland environment of rivers and floodplains, and their civilization depended on the agricultural productivity of that environment and on the waterways that connected their world. Environmental changes could have undermined this foundation. In particular, there is the possibility of changes in the rivers, the shifting of river courses, which is a real phenomenon in such lowland environments, where rivers can change their paths over time. If the rivers that sustained a center shifted their courses, moving away from the center, the consequences could have been severe, disrupting agriculture, transport, water supply, the very foundations of the center's life. Changes in the environment, in the rivers, in the agricultural conditions could have undermined the basis of the Olmec centers, contributing to their decline. There are social and political factors. Complex societies can decline through internal processes, through social upheaval, through the breakdown of the political order, through conflict, or the failure of the systems that held the society together. The deliberate defacement of the monuments, if it reflects social upheaval, might point to internal conflict or rebellion as a factor in the decline. The collapse of the authority of the rulers, the breakdown of the social order, the disruption of the systems that organized Olmec society could have contributed to the end of the centers. And there may have been a combination of factors, as is so often the case with the decline of civilizations, environmental stresses and social upheavals interacting, reinforcing one another, undermining the foundations of the Olmec world from several directions at once. The honest answer is that we do not know with certainty why the Olmec centers declined, and the causes were probably multiple and interacting, a combination of environmental and social factors that we can only partly reconstruct. The decline of the Olmec, like the decline of many civilizations, remains in its precise causes a genuine and open question. But now we come to the crucial clarification, the thing that must be understood to see the Olmec end rightly, because the word disappearance can be deeply misleading. The Olmec did not vanish in the sense of a people being wiped out, ceasing to exist, disappearing from the earth. That is not what happened, and it is important to say so clearly. What ended was the classic Olmec civilization, the particular phase of monumental centers and colossal heads and distinctive Olmec culture. The centers declined and were abandoned. The distinctive Olmec civilization passed away. But the people did not vanish. Their descendants continued to live in the region. Their cultural influence continued, transformed, in the civilizations that followed. The Olmec did not disappear as a people or as an influence. Their particular civilization ended, but they flowed on into the peoples and the cultures that came after. This is a crucial distinction, and it connects to the deepest theme of our whole exploration. The end of the Olmec was not an extinction, but a transformation. The classic civilization declined, but the Olmec legacy, the achievements and the innovations and the cultural foundations they had created, flowed forward into the later Mesoamerican world. The gods, the writing, the ball game, the art styles, the religious concepts, the whole template the Olmec had established was inherited and elaborated by the civilizations that followed. In this sense, the Olmec never really disappeared at all. They were absorbed, transformed, carried forward, their legacy living on in everything that came after them in Mesoamerica. The vanishing of the Olmec was the passing of a particular civilization, but the continuation of its influence, the transformation of an ending into an inheritance. And this brings us at last to the great question that has hovered over our entire exploration, the question of just how foundational the Olmec really were, of how much the later civilizations inherited from them, of whether they were truly the source of the whole Mesoamerican world. Because if the Olmec legacy flowed forward so powerfully into everything that came after, then perhaps the Olmec were not just the first Mesoamerican civilization, but the mother culture, the origin from which all the rest descended. Or perhaps, as others argue, they were one of several cultures developing together, a sister among sisters rather than a mother of all. This is the great debate of Olmec studies, and it is the intellectual heart of our whole subject. Let us turn to it now. Mother culture or sister culture? We arrive now at the great debate, the question that lies at the intellectual heart of Olmec studies, the question that scholars have argued over for decades and continue to argue over today. It is a genuine, live, scholarly controversy, not a manufactured mystery, and it concerns the fundamental place of the Olmec in the story of Mesoamerica. The question is this: were the Olmec the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the single founding civilization from which all the later cultures, the Maya, the Aztec, and the rest, ultimately descended? Or were they one sister culture among several, one of a number of early societies that developed alongside one another, influencing and exchanging with each other, no single one of them the sole parent of the rest? Mother culture or sister culture? Let us explore this great debate honestly, presenting both sides in their strength, and see where the evidence points. Let us begin with the mother culture view in its strongest form, because it is a powerful and compelling position, and for a long time, it was the dominant one. The mother culture hypothesis holds that the Olmec were the first true civilization of Mesoamerica, and that they were the source, the origin, the fountainhead from which the essential elements of Mesoamerican civilization flowed to all the later peoples. On this view, the Olmec developed first, achieving civilization before anyone else in the region, and then their innovations, their gods, their writing, their calendar, their art styles, their religious concepts, their political forms spread outward to the other peoples of Mesoamerica, shaping and founding the later civilizations. And the Olmec, in this view, are the mother of all Mesoamerican cultures, the single root from which the whole great tree of Mesoamerican civilization grew. And the mother culture view has real evidence and real arguments in its favor, which we should present fairly. The Olmec were, as far as we can tell, genuinely first, the earliest complex civilization in Mesoamerica preceding the others. Olmec influence appears widely across Mesoamerica, with Olmec-style art and iconography and objects found far beyond the Olmec heartland in distant regions, suggesting that Olmec culture spread and influenced peoples across a wide area. Many of the fundamental elements of later Mesoamerican civilization, as we have seen, appear first or early among the Olmec: the sacred jaguar, the gods, the ball game, the beginnings of writing, the art styles, suggesting that the Olmec originated these elements and passed them on. The Olmec look on this evidence like the founders, the originators, the source, their influence spreading across Mesoamerica and their innovations becoming the foundations of the later civilizations. The mother culture view captures something real, the genuine priority and influence of the Olmec, their apparent role as originators of so much that came after. But now let us present the sister culture view, also in its strongest form, because it too is a serious and well-argued position, and in recent times it has gained considerable ground. The sister culture hypothesis holds that the Olmec, while early and important, were not the sole mother of Mesoamerican civilization, but rather one of several early cultures that developed alongside one another in different regions, interacting and exchanging and influencing one another, so that Mesoamerican civilization emerged not from a single founding source, but from a network of related cultures developing together. On this view, there were other early societies in other regions of Mesoamerica developing their own complexity, their own innovations at the same time as the Olmec, and the great features of Mesoamerican civilization emerged from the interaction among these cultures, not from the Olmec alone. The Olmec were one sister among several, distinguished perhaps by the spectacular scale of some of their achievements, but not the sole parent of the rest. And the sister culture view also has real evidence and real arguments. There is growing evidence of other early developments in other regions of Mesoamerica, of complexity arising in more than one place, suggesting that the Olmec were not entirely alone as pioneers. The spread of Olmec-style objects and imagery can be interpreted not only as Olmec influence radiating outward, but as participation in a network of exchange among cultures, with influence flowing in multiple directions, not just from the Olmec to everyone else. Some of the features once attributed solely to Olmec origin may have developed in more than one place, or through interaction among several cultures. The picture, on this view, is less of a single mother giving birth to all the rest, and more of a family of sister cultures growing up together, exchanging and influencing one another, jointly producing the Mesoamerican tradition. The sister culture view captures something real too, the growing evidence for multiple early developments and for a network of interacting cultures rather than a single sole source. So we have two serious positions, each with real evidence, each capturing something true. And this is a genuine scholarly debate, actively argued, not settled. How should we think about it, honestly? Where does the evidence point? The honest answer is that the debate is real and not fully resolved, and that the truth may lie somewhere between the two positions, or may combine elements of both. It seems clear that the Olmec were genuinely early, genuinely influential, and genuinely originators of much that mattered in Mesoamerican civilization. That much the evidence strongly supports, and it captures the real insight of the mother culture view. But it also seems increasingly clear that the Olmec were not entirely alone, that other early cultures were developing alongside them. That influence flowed in multiple directions, and that Mesoamerican civilization emerged from interaction as well as from Olmec origination. That captures the real insight of the sister culture view. The truth, as so often in genuine scholarly debates, may be a nuanced combination. The Olmec as a preeminent early culture, first and enormously influential, but developing within and contributing to a network of interacting cultures rather than as the sole and isolated mother of everything. And this nuance is not a disappointing fudge, but a richer and more accurate picture than either extreme. It recognizes the genuine primacy and influence of the Olmec, their real role as pioneers and originators, without falling into the oversimplification that they alone created everything and that all the other cultures were merely passive recipients. It recognizes the real evidence for multiple developments and interactions, without dismissing the special importance of the Olmec. The most honest position holds both truths together, the Olmec as extraordinarily important, early and influential, and Mesoamerican civilization as the product of a network of interacting cultures in which the Olmec played a leading, perhaps the leading, but not the sole role. Why does this debate matter beyond the technical question of cultural origins? It matters because it concerns how we understand the emergence of civilization itself, and because it bears on the deepest theme of our whole exploration. The mother culture and sister culture debate is, at bottom, a debate about how civilization arises, whether from a single founding genius that spreads outward, or from the interaction of many centers developing together. And both models are found in human history in different times and places. The debate about the Olmec is a specific instance of this large and important question, and that is part of why it is so actively pursued. But it matters too for the theme that has run through our whole journey, the recognition of the genius of the Native American peoples who created this civilization. Because whether the Olmec were the sole mother culture or one of several sisters, the essential truth is the same and is not in doubt. The civilization of Mesoamerica in all its later glory, the Maya and the Aztec and the rest, grew from Native American roots, from the achievements of indigenous American peoples, developing in the Americas through their own genius and their own interactions. Whether that root was a single Olmec mother or a family of sister cultures, it was Native American, indigenous, homegrown. The great debate about the Olmec is a debate among positions that all affirm the indigenous American origin of Mesoamerican civilization. It is a debate about the details of how that indigenous civilization emerged, not about whether it was indigenous. And that is the crucial point that connects this debate to everything we have explored. The debate over the Olmec's place in Mesoamerican history brings us finally to the question of legacy, of what the Olmec gave to the world that came after them, and of the true meaning of this first American civilization. Whether mother or sister, the Olmec left an immense inheritance, and their story carries a profound lesson about how we understand the achievements of the peoples of the past. Let us turn now to the Olmec legacy and to the real wonder of what they achieved. We have followed the Olmec from their sudden appearance in the lowland jungle, through their colossal heads and their controversial faces, their moving of mountains and their earliest writing, their gods and their vanishing, and the great debate over their place in history. Now it is time to gather the meaning of it all, to ask what the Olmec gave to the world that came after them, and to draw out the profound lesson their story carries. Because whatever the resolution of the mother culture debate, the Olmec left an immense legacy, and their story teaches us something important about how we understand the achievements of the human past. Let us consider the Olmec legacy and the real wonder of what they achieved. Let us trace the threads that run from the Olmec forward into the later civilizations of Mesoamerica, because they are many, and together they reveal the depth of the Olmec inheritance. We have encountered these threads throughout our journey, and now let us gather them and see the whole tapestry of what the Olmec passed on. There is the thread of religion, the sacred jaguar, the were-jaguar, the supernatural beings, the gods associated with rain and maize and the forces of nature. The whole conception of the sacred that appears among the Olmec flows forward into the religions of the later civilizations, elaborated and transformed but rooted in the Olmec vision. The spiritual world of Mesoamerica, in all its later richness, traces its foundations back toward the Olmec. There is the thread of writing. If the Olmec developed the earliest writing in the Americas, then the whole Mesoamerican tradition of writing, culminating in the great script of the Maya, may descend from the Olmec beginning. The Olmec as the founders of literacy in the hemisphere, the source of the technology of writing that would flower in the later civilizations. There is the thread of the calendar and the counting of time, so central to the later Mesoamerican civilizations, especially the Maya with their extraordinary calendrical systems. The foundations of Mesoamerican timekeeping and calendar, of the counting and recording of days and cycles, appear to reach back toward the Olmec and their era, the beginnings of the sophisticated calendrical tradition that would become so central to Mesoamerican civilization. There is the thread of the ball game, the sacred game played across Mesoamerica for millennia, laden with religious and cosmic meaning, tracing its roots back toward the Olmec, who lived in the land of rubber and appear to have been among the originators of this profound tradition. There is the thread of art and its styles, the conventions and forms and symbols of Olmec art influencing and founding the artistic traditions of the later civilizations, the Olmec aesthetic vision echoing through Mesoamerican art. There is the thread of monumental building and the ordering of ceremonial centers, the Olmec practice of raising monumental centers, of arranging sacred landscapes, of building on a grand scale, laying foundations for the great cities and ceremonial centers of the later civilizations. And there is the thread of social and political forms, the Olmec development of complex society, of powerful rulership, of organized labor and elite authority, providing a template for the political and social organization of the later Mesoamerican world. Gather all these threads together, and the picture is overwhelming. The Olmec bequeathed to the later civilizations of Mesoamerica a vast inheritance, religion and gods, writing and calendar, the ball game and the ritual traditions, art styles and monumental buildings, social and political forms, a whole foundation of civilization. Whether they were the sole mother culture or the leading sister, the Olmec were founders, the source of an immense proportion of what would characterize Mesoamerican civilization for the next 3,000 years, when the Maya raised their temples and wrote their histories and tracked the stars, when the Aztec built their empire and worshipped their gods. They were building on foundations the Olmec had laid, inheriting a world the Olmec had, in large part, created. The Olmec legacy is the foundation of Mesoamerican civilization itself. And this brings us to the profound lesson that the Olmec story carries, the lesson that has run through our whole journey and that reaches its fullest expression here. It is a lesson about the genius of the peoples of the past and about a recurring error in how we have understood them. We began at the outset by noting the impulse to attribute the Olmec achievement to outsiders, the hypothesis that the colossal heads pointed to visitors from across the ocean, the assumption that this magnificent civilization must have had some external source. And we saw that this impulse, whatever its intentions, participates in a troubling and recurring pattern, the pattern of denying to native peoples the credit for their own achievements, of assuming that the impressive works of non-European peoples must have required outside help. We have encountered this pattern before at Baalbek, where the instinct was to attribute the colossal stones to giants or lost civilizations, rather than to the human beings who raised them. And we encounter it here in its full form applied to the first civilization of the Americas. The truth, the honest and the just truth, is that the Olmec achievement belongs to the Olmec, to the Native American peoples who created it. They appeared not from nowhere and not from across the ocean, but through the development of their own society in their own land, a development we can partly infer even where we cannot fully see it. They carved the colossal heads with their own hands, portraits of their own rulers in their own artistic style. They moved the mountains of stone by their own ingenuity, using their own understanding of their own landscape and its rivers. They developed writing and religion and the ball game and the calendar and the whole foundation of Mesoamerican civilization through their own genius, their own creativity, their own achievement. The Olmec were not the recipients of some external gift of civilization. They were the creators of a civilization, one of the founding civilizations of the human world, and it was entirely their own. And this is why the honest answer is not a deflation but an elevation, not a diminishment of the wonder but a proper location of it. The wonder of the Olmec is not that they had outside help or lost technology or mysterious origins across the sea. The wonder is that a Native American people in the lowland jungle of the Gulf Coast 3,000 years ago, through their own genius and effort, created the first great civilization of the Americas, carved the colossal heads, moved the mountains, invented writing, shaped a religion, and laid the foundations of a whole world of civilizations that would follow. That is a more magnificent truth than any tale of outside origins could be, because it is real and because it belongs to them, to the Olmec, to the Native American peoples whose genius created a world. There's a deep justice in recognizing this, in giving the Olmec their due, in seeing them not as a mystery requiring external explanation, but as the brilliant founding civilization they were. For too long, the achievements of the ancient Americas were underestimated, attributed to outside sources, denied the full recognition they deserved. To see the Olmec clearly, to recognize their genius, to credit them with their own magnificent achievements, is to correct that error, to restore to a great people the honor that is theirs. The Olmec invented a world, and that world, the world of Mesoamerican civilization, was a Native American creation, one of the great independent achievements of the human species, arising in the Americas through the genius of its indigenous peoples. We have found the meaning of the Olmec and the wonder of their achievement properly located at last. It remains only to gather it all together, to stand one final time before the colossal heads, and to reflect on what they are, what they mean, and why they hold us across 3,000 years. Let us turn to our final reflection on the faces in the jungle. We began in the green, before the giant faces staring out of the Mexican jungle, and we have journeyed through the whole story of the people who carved them, the Olmec, the first great civilization of the Americas. We have watched them appear, marveled at their colossal heads, confronted the controversy over the faces, followed the mountains of stone across the landscape, examined the earliest American writing, entered their spiritual world, traced their vanishing, and weighed their place as founders of a whole civilization tradition. Now, at the end of our journey, let us gather what we have found and stand one last time before the faces in the jungle and ask what they finally mean and why they hold us as they do. Let us remember first what we know, because it is a great deal, and it is magnificent. We know that more than 3,000 years ago, in the lowland jungle of the Gulf Coast of Mexico, the first complex civilization of the Americas arose. We know that this civilization, the Olmec, built great centers, raised monumental earthworks, and carved the colossal heads, portraits of their rulers in many tons of basalt. We know that they moved this stone across difficult terrain without the wheel and without draft animals, by the ingenious use of rivers and rafts and massed human effort. We know that they developed the earliest writing in the Americas, a script we cannot yet read. We know that they created a rich religion of jaguars and gods and sacred power, and originated the ball game and other traditions. We know that their centers eventually declined and were abandoned, their monuments sometimes deliberately defaced and buried, and we know that they laid the foundations of Mesoamerican civilization, bequeathing an immense legacy to the Maya, the Aztec, and all the rest. All of this we know, and all of it is the achievement of a Native American people, the first Americans to build a civilization. And let us remember what we do not know, because the mysteries are real and they are part of the wonder. We do not fully understand the process by which the Olmec civilization arose, because so much of the early record is hidden beneath the jungle and the sediment. We cannot read their writing, cannot hear the words they wish to preserve. We do not know with certainty why their centers declined, or exactly what the deliberate defacement of their monuments meant. And we have not fully resolved the great debate over their place in history, whether they were the sole mother culture or one of several sisters. These are genuine, open mysteries, real questions that scholars continue to pursue, and they give the Olmec an enduring fascination, a civilization we can see but cannot fully know, glimpsed through the gaps in the green. Now, let us reflect on the deepest thing we have found, the lesson that the Olmec carry, because it is a lesson worth taking to heart. We saw that the impulse to attribute the Olmec achievement to outsiders, to visitors from across the ocean, however sincerely sometimes held, participates in a troubling pattern, the denial to native peoples of the credit for their own achievements. And we saw that the honest answer, the evidence supports, is that the Olmec achievement belongs to the Olmec, to the Native American peoples who created it through their own genius and effort. This is the deepest meaning of our journey, the recovery of the genius of the first American civilization, the recognition that they created their world themselves and that their achievement is more wonderful for being their own. And this lesson reaches beyond the Olmec to all the peoples of the past whose achievements have been doubted, diminished or attributed to others. The instinct to say that a great work must have required outside help that ordinary people or native people or non-European people could not have done it themselves is an instinct we should recognize and resist wherever it appears. The great achievements of the human past belong overwhelmingly to the ordinary and extraordinary human beings who actually accomplished them through their own genius and effort. To see this clearly, to give credit where it is due, is not only more honest but more just, and it reveals a world more wonderful than any tale of outside intervention, a world in which human beings in every land and every age created civilizations and monuments and wonders through their own capabilities. The Olmec teach us to see the genius of the peoples of the past and to honor it. So when we stand, at the last, before the colossal heads, before the faces in the jungle, what are we really seeing? We are seeing the portraits of the first Americans to build a civilization, the rulers of a people who created a world. We are seeing the achievement of Native American genius in stone, carved by their own hands 3,000 years ago. We are seeing the founders, the pioneers, the source of so much that would follow in the Americas. And we are seeing in those individual faces, those particular human beings, the humanity of a people who lived and ruled and worshipped and created and who wanted to be remembered and who are. There is something profound in the way the colossal heads look out at us across 3,000 years. They are portraits, individual and human, and they meet our eyes with a presence and a dignity that collapses the distance of time. They are the gaze of the first American civilization, staring out of the green, refusing to be forgotten. And in their faces we see not a mystery to be explained away, not a puzzle requiring outside origins, but a people, a great and founding people, who created a civilization through their own genius and left these faces to remember them by. The faces in the jungle are the faces of the Olmec, the first Americans to build a world, and they are looking at us still. The heads will remain, as they have remained for 3,000 years, staring out of the lowland jungle, weathered by the ages but enduring, the portraits of a founding civilization. They will continue to astonish everyone who stands before them, to raise the old questions, who and how and why. And now perhaps we can stand before them with a truer understanding, seeing in them not a mystery of outside origins, but the real and greater wonder of what a Native American people achieved, the first civilization of the Americas, created by the genius of its own people, gazing out at us across the millennia from the faces in the jungle. What do you believe when you look into the faces of the colossal heads? What do you see? The portraits of a brilliant founding civilization, the first Americans to build a world through their own genius. And what do you think became of the Olmec, and how much of the Mesoamerican world that followed truly began with them? Were they the mother of it all, or the first among sisters? Tell us in the comments. The faces in the jungle keep their secrets, and we will never tire of seeking them. If this journey to meet the first civilization of the Americas and to stand before the colossal heads changed the way you see the ancient world and the genius of the peoples who shaped it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more journeys into the mysteries of the human past and the wonders that human hands have made.